The day had started just as Brandon had hoped. He woke early, stretching in the quiet comfort of their shared bed, taking a moment to watch Isabel sleeping beside him. Her auburn hair spilled over her pillow, her breathing soft and steady. He smiled to himself, remembering the young woman she had been when they met at university, bold, clever, and fiercely independent. The house was silent as he got up, showered, and began his preparations for the day. He had taken the day off work, a rare indulgence, to ensure everything was perfect. Isabel deserved it, he thought. 21 years of marriage was no small feat, and while their relationship had its ups and downs, Brandon always believed their love was stronger than any challenge. By mid-afternoon, the house was immaculate, the dining table set with their finest china, and the smell of rosemary and garlic from the roast lamb filled the air. Brandon opened a bottle of vintage wine they'd been saving and placed it on the table, flanked by 2 tall candles. He stepped back, surveying his work with satisfaction. Just as he adjusted the silverware for the final time, he heard Isabel's heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "Wow," she said, her voice laced with admiration as she stepped into the room. "You've really gone all out, haven't you?" Brandon turned to her, his smile widening. "Only the best for you." She looked stunning, her emerald green dress fitting her perfectly, her lips painted a deep red. She twirled slightly, the hem of her dress swishing as she moved toward the table. "I must say, Brandon, I wasn't expecting this. You've outdone yourself." He pulled out a chair for her, gesturing for her to sit. "After 21 years, I think you deserve to be spoiled." Isabel chuckled softly, settling into the chair. "Well, aren't you the perfect husband?" Brandon took his seat across from her and poured them each a glass of wine. They clinked glasses, and he held her gaze for a moment. "To us," he said warmly. "To us," she echoed, though her smile faltered slightly as she took a sip. They started their meal, and Brandon launched into a story about his latest project, a skyscraper that was set to redefine the city's skyline. Isabel nodded along, but she seemed distracted, her eyes darting occasionally toward the clock on the wall. "You're not even listening," he teased, a playful grin on his face. She blinked, snapping her attention back to him. "What? No, of course I am. The skyscraper sound like a big deal?" He raised an eyebrow, his grin fading. "You okay? You seem distant." Isabel waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, I'm fine. Just thinking about tonight. I've got something planned, too." Brandon leaned forward, intrigued. "Something planned? You didn't tell me." Her lips curled into a small, enigmatic smile as she took another sip of wine. "I wanted it to be a surprise." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You're terrible with surprises, you know. You always give them away too early." "Not this time," she said, her voice low, almost teasing. Brandon studied her for a moment, his smile faltering. There was something about her tone, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. She seemed amused, almost smug. "All right, now I'm curious," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Give me a hint." She shook her head, laughing lightly. "Not a chance. You'll find out soon enough." Dinner had gone smoothly, at least on the surface. The roast lamb Brandon had prepared was perfectly cooked, and the wine they shared was one of their favorites. As Brandon spoke about his latest project, his enthusiasm lit up the room. His words spilled out in steady streams as he described the glasswork designs, the structural innovations, and the recognition he'd already received from peers. Isabel, seated across the table, nodded at the right moments, occasionally murmuring a soft, "Wow," or "That's incredible." Her smile seemed genuine, but Brandon couldn't help noticing her gaze flickering toward the clock. She'd done it once, then twice, and now again. Brandon paused mid-sentence, setting his fork down. "You've been looking at the clock a lot," he said, his tone light but curious. "Am I boring you?" Isabel's head snapped back toward him, her smile reappearing quickly. "What? Of course not. I just—" She paused, biting her lip in a way that once made Brandon feel weak, but now seemed calculated. "I've got something planned for later. A surprise." He tilted his head, intrigued. "A surprise? You know I hate suspense, Isabel." She laughed softly, swirling her wine glass. "Well, you'll just have to trust me. Should I be worried?" He teased, though there was a faint unease creeping into his voice. She smirked, leaning back in her chair. You'll find out soon enough. Dessert arrived. Chocolate mousse Brandon had picked up from a local patisserie. They both ate in near silence, the air between them charged with unspoken tension. Brandon glanced at Isabel a few times, trying to read her expression. She seemed different tonight. There was something in her eyes, a glint of mischief that felt out of place. Isabel set her fork down, breaking the silence. "I have a surprise for you tonight," she said, her voice light but deliberate. Brandon leaned back in his chair, studying her. "A surprise? You're really dragging this out." She chuckled, sipping her wine. "Well, I've been thinking about us, our relationship, and how we could spice things up." The words caught him off guard. He raised an eyebrow, setting his glass down. "Spice things up? What do you mean?" Isabel's smile widened, a smirk creeping onto her face. Add a little excitement. Something different." "Okay," Brandon said slowly, frowning. "Go on." She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "I invited someone to join us tonight. Another man." The room seemed to go still. Brandon stared at her, his mind struggling to process what she had just said. "What?" he said, his voice low. Isabel tilted her head, her tone turning playful. "I thought it might be fun. Imagine how it'll spark our relationship. You'll see a whole new side of me and feel just how desirable I am." Brandon's fork slipped from his hand, clattering loudly against the plate. He stared at her, a mix of disbelief and anger flashing across his face. "Are you joking?" he asked, his voice tight. She shrugged, her smirk deepening as she picked up her wine glass again. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Brandon. Where's the confidence you're always bragging about? I thought you'd welcome a little competition. Or are you afraid he might outdo you?" The heat rose in Brandon's chest, his hands curling into fists under the table. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "The moment that bastard steps foot into my house, I'll turn him into a mess and rip his damn Johnson off. I'll throw both of you out on the street for all the neighbors to laugh at." Isabel laughed, sharp, cruel, and mocking. "Oh, relax, loser. You've become so predictable." Brandon's jaw tightened. "Predictable? Where's the fun?" she continued, ignoring the growing storm in his voice. "I thought you were a man who could handle surprises. Guess I was wrong." He glared at her, his chest tightening with a mix of fury and betrayal. He wanted to scream at her, to demand an explanation, but he also felt blindsided. This was Isabel, the woman he'd built his life with, the woman he thought he knew better than anyone. And yet, here she was sitting across from him, smirking like it was all some kind of game. Just then, the doorbell rang. The sound pierced through the tense silence, and Brandon turned his head sharply toward the front door. "What the hell is going on, Isabel?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. She stood, smoothing her dress as if she hadn't just dropped a bomb on their marriage. "Relax, Brandon. You'll see." "Isabel," he said, his voice rising. "Don't do this." But she was already walking toward the door, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Brandon pushed his chair back, standing abruptly. His mind raced as he followed her to the entryway, a sick feeling settling in his stomach. Brandon's heart pounded as Isabel strode toward the door, her heels clicking against the polished hardwood floor. He followed her, his breath shallow, his fists curling tightly at his sides. She pulled the door open, revealing a man who instantly set Brandon's teeth on edge. The guy was tall, easily 6'3", with a gym-hardened physique that he made no effort to hide beneath his snug black t-shirt. His grin was cocky, self-assured, the kind of grin that screamed trouble. He radiated the kind of arrogance Brandon despised. "Brandon," Isabel said, her voice sweet but laced with something darker. "Meet Damien." Damien stepped inside without hesitation, scanning the home with the air of someone appraising property he might buy. He whistled softly, his grin widening. "Nice place you got here, pal. Guess it pays to be stable." Brandon's jaw tightened, his blood beginning to boil. He didn't miss the subtle jab, nor the way Damien's eyes slid lazily over Isabel before meeting his own. Damien's grin turned into a smirk. "Hope you don't mind me sharing your wife tonight." For a moment, the room fell silent. The audacity of the man's words hung in the air like a bad smell, and Brandon could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. Isabel let out a light laugh, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Damien, stop. Brandon is just adjusting. Brandon didn't move. He locked eyes with Damien, his expression unreadable. Damien, was it? He said, his voice calm but cold. Why don't you have a seat? Let's talk man to man. Damien raised an eyebrow, but didn't back down. Sure, he said, swaggering over to the living room couch. He plopped himself down, spreading his arms across the backrest like he owned the place. Isabel hovered near the door, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. Brandon, don't make this awkward, she said, her tone more clipped now. Oh, I won't, Brandon replied, his voice level, but his eyes dark. He turned on his heel and strode into the kitchen. As he entered the kitchen, his mind raced, the adrenaline coursing through him. He leaned against the counter for a moment, gripping its edge so tightly his knuckles turned white. The betrayal was overwhelming, but the smug arrogance of Damien? That was the gasoline on the fire. He opened a drawer, his hand hovering over the assortment of tools and utensils. A sharp knife gleamed under the overhead light. For a split second, a dark thought crossed his mind, but he pushed it away. He wasn't about to lose himself in the heat of the moment. Instead, he grabbed his phone from the counter and began scrolling through his contacts. His lawyer's number was saved, along with a few other people he might need soon. He opened the camera app and silently crept to the edge of the kitchen, peering into the living room. Damien had his legs crossed, sipping a glass of wine Isabel had poured for him. He was laughing, saying something Brandon couldn't quite hear. Isabel sat next to him, her body angled toward Damien in a way that made Brandon's stomach churn. Brandon stepped back into the kitchen, taking a deep breath. He had seen enough. The betrayal was no longer just a suspicion. It was staring him in the face. He returned to the living room, his expression eerily calm. Damien glanced up, clearly expecting anger or confrontation, but Brandon offered neither. So, Damien, Brandon began, sitting across from him. What do you do for a living? Damien chuckled, leaning back into the couch. I'm in the fitness industry. Personal trainer. Helps when you've got genetics like mine, though. Brandon nodded, pretending to be impressed. I see. That's admirable. Do you make good money doing that? Damien smirked, clearly enjoying the attention. Enough. But it's not just about the money, you know? It's about the lifestyle. Living in the moment. Taking what you want. Brandon's eyes flickered to Isabel, who was biting her lip nervously. Interesting philosophy, Brandon said, his tone still maddeningly calm. And how exactly did you meet my wife? Damien hesitated for a split second before laughing. Oh, we met at her gym. She came in for some sessions, and well, one thing led to another. Isabel shifted uncomfortably, her bravado cracking just a little. Brandon, let's not. No, Brandon interrupted, holding up a hand. I want to hear this. He turned back to Damien, his smile tight. Go on. Damien shrugged. She told me you wouldn't mind. Said you were all about keeping things fresh, you know? Brandon laughed, sharp, bitter, and entirely unexpected. She told you that? Isabel's eyes widened slightly. Brandon, no, Isabel, let him talk, Brandon said, cutting her off. His voice was low, but there was an edge to it now. Damien looked between them, sensing the shift in energy, but too cocky to backpedal. Look, man, I'm not here to cause trouble. If this isn't your thing, I can leave. But, he glanced at Isabel, a smug grin tugging at his lips. She seemed pretty eager for me to stick around. Brandon's laugh was cold and humorless. Oh, I bet she did. The tension in the room was palpable now. Isabel shifted in her seat, her facade crumbling under the weight of Brandon's calm, yet menacing demeanor. Brandon leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. Tell me something, Damien. Do you make it a habit of walking into other men's homes and disrespecting them? Damien frowned, his grin faltering slightly. Hey, man, I'm just doing what she asked. If you got a problem, take it up with her. Oh, I will, Brandon said, standing abruptly. But first, let me get something. Brandon returned to the living room, carrying a bottle of whiskey and 3 glasses. His face was calm, betraying none of the fury brewing inside him. Thought we'd celebrate properly, he said with a faint smile. He poured Damien a generous glass, then filled one for himself. Damien leaned back, clearly at ease. Celebrating what? He asked, raising an eyebrow. To new beginnings, Brandon replied, his voice steady. Isabel laughed nervously, clinking her glass against Damien's. Now that's the spirit, Brandon. I knew you'd come around. Brandon raised his glass, locking eyes with Damien for a brief moment. His stare was calm, yet unnervingly focused. Cheers, he said, tipping the glass to his lips and pretending to take a sip. Damien smirked and gulped down the whiskey like a man who thought he owned the world. Isabel followed suit, though she kept darting glances at Brandon, as if trying to gauge what he was really thinking. So, Damien, Brandon said, sitting down across from him, tell me about yourself. You said you're a personal trainer. Damien nodded, his confidence growing with every word. Yeah, got my own clientele, you know? Women mostly. He chuckled, shooting Isabel a knowing look. They tend to, appreciate my services. Brandon forced a chuckle, keeping his tone light. I'll bet they do. You must be good at what you do. Damien shrugged, his smug grin widening. What can I say? I've got the whole package, looks, charm, skills. Women can't resist. Brandon leaned back, swirling his whiskey as he spoke. And you must be pretty selective about your clients, right? I mean, I imagine not everyone can afford someone like you. Damien laughed. Exactly. I don't waste my time with just anyone. But Isabel here? She's special. Brandon clenched his jaw, but didn't let it show. Special, he repeated softly, his voice devoid of emotion. Isabel shifted uncomfortably, clearly picking up on the undertone. Brandon, let's not get too formal. Tonight's about relaxing, isn't it? Of course, Brandon replied smoothly. He glanced at Damien, who was already pouring himself another drink. How about I grab some snacks? You two make yourselves comfortable. Before either could respond, Brandon slipped into the kitchen, pulling out his phone as soon as he was out of sight. His hands moved quickly, firing off texts to his lawyer, private investigator, and financial advisor. Brandon, it's happening tonight. I need the divorce papers prepped by morning. Make sure the accounts are locked down. Lawyer. Understood. We'll confirm. Brandon. P.I. Get ready to send me everything you have on them. I'll need the files. P.I. All set. The footage and photos are ready. Brandon smirked as he tucked his phone back into his pocket. The pieces of his plan were falling into place. He returned to the living room with a bowl of mixed nuts, setting it on the coffee table. Here we go, he said casually, sitting down again. Damien reached for the bowl without hesitation. Thanks, man. See? You're not such a bad guy after all. Brandon grinned, his expression unreadable. I try. For the next hour, Brandon kept the conversation flowing, skillfully masking his contempt with polite small talk. Damien grew more and more relaxed, clearly enjoying himself. Isabel, on the other hand, was starting to look uneasy. Finally, Brandon stood and stretched. Excuse me for a moment, he said, heading toward his study. He closed the door behind him, locking it for good measure. Sitting at his desk, he pulled up the hidden security footage from the cameras he had installed weeks ago. His suspicions about Isabel had been gnawing at him for months, and he'd decided to take matters into his own hands. Now, the proof was staring back at him. Clip after clip showed Isabel and Damien in his home, on the couch, in the kitchen, even in their bed. Brandon's stomach churned, but he forced himself to watch every second. He needed the anger, the pain. He needed it to fuel what he was about to do. He downloaded the footage to his phone, then forwarded it to his lawyer and P.I. Brandon, here's the proof. Make sure this gets to the right people. P.I. done. You're covered. Taking a deep breath, Brandon returned to the living room. Damien was now sprawled across the couch, looking completely at home. Isabel was perched on the edge of the armchair, her nervous glances betraying her unease. You've been in there a while, she said, forcing a laugh. Just handling some work, Brandon replied smoothly. You know how it is? Damien snorted. Man, you need to loosen up. You're wound tighter than a drum. Brandon smiled faintly, ignoring the jab. You're probably right. I think it's time to call it a night, though. Isabel blinked. What? But we were just... Damien needs to leave, Brandon said, his voice firm now. Damien raised an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard. What's the rush? I thought we were just getting started. Brandon crossed his arms, his calm demeanor slipping just enough to reveal the steel underneath. I've been more than polite, but my patience is running thin. Leave. Now. Damien scoffed, standing up slowly. All right, man. No need to get your panties in a twist. He turned to Isabel, his grin returning. Call me later, babe. Brandon's fist clenched, but he stayed rooted in place, watching as Damien sauntered toward the door. Brandon set his phone on the table and looked at both of them. Wait, Damien. Isabel. Let's cut the pretense. Isabel tilted her head, feigning ignorance, though her trembling hands betrayed her. What are you talking about, Brandon? Brandon smirked, but there was no humor in it. You wanted to surprise me, didn't you? Well, it turns out I have a surprise for you, too. He reached for his phone, tapped the screen, and turned it around so they could see the video playing. The footage was crystal clear. Isabel and Damien, tangled together in bed, the bed Brandon had shared with his wife for over 2 decades. The timestamp showed it had happened in their home just days ago. Isabel's face went ghostly white. Brandon, I can explain. Don't, Brandon snapped, his voice cold and cutting. Don't insult me further by trying to justify it. Damien leaned forward, his smirk faltering, but still present. All right, man, let's not get dramatic. These things happen. No need to blow it out of proportion. Brandon turned to him, his eyes narrowing. These things happen? He let out a cold laugh. Not in my house, they don't. And definitely not with my wife. But don't worry, Damien. You'll get your share of consequences, too. Isabel's voice trembled as she tried to regain control of the situation. Brandon, please. Let's talk about this privately. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. He held up a hand to silence her. You don't get to negotiate. You had your chance to be honest, to respect what we built together. Instead, you decided to spit on it. Damien leaned back, feigning indifference. All right, man, what's your deal? You caught us. Big whoop. What now? You gonna cry about it? Brandon's lips curled into a dangerous smile. Oh, I'm not going to cry. I'm going to ruin you. Both of you. Damien frowned, the bravado slipping slightly. What are you talking about? Brandon picked up his phone again, this time pulling up a series of documents. He slid it across the table toward Isabel. First, the house. You like living here, Isabel? Too bad. It's in my name. You're leaving tonight. Isabel's eyes widened. You can't be serious. Brandon ignored her and turned to Damien. Second, the bank accounts. Isabel, you've been enjoying a life of luxury, spending money like it's infinite. Guess what? I froze all our joint accounts this afternoon. Isabel's voice broke. Brandon, please. Don't do this. We've been married for 21 years. And you threw it all away, he said, his tone sharp as a blade. Oh, and Damien? Don't think you're walking out unscathed. Damien sat up straighter, trying to mask his unease. What are you talking about? Brandon leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You run a gym chain, don't you? Or at least you did. Funny thing, I'm the majority shareholder in that chain. As of this evening, your contracts are terminated, your memberships are void, and your staff has been notified of your extracurricular activities. Damien's cocky grin vanished completely. You're bluffing? Brandon raised an eyebrow, then casually scrolled through his phone. Here's the email I sent to the board of directors. Feel free to confirm with them in the morning. Damien's jaw tightened, and he stood abruptly. You think you can mess with me? You think this is over? Brandon rose as well, his height and calm demeanor making him seem even more intimidating. Oh, it's far from over. I've barely started. Isabel, now sobbing, reached for Brandon's arm. Please, Brandon, don't do this. I was stupid. I made a mistake. Please give me a chance to make it right. He stared at her hand on his arm, as though it were a piece of dirt. A mistake? You call months of sneaking around in my home a mistake? He shook her off, his voice rising. Do you know what tonight was supposed to be? A celebration of everything we built together. And you turned it into a circus. Isabel fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. I'll do anything, Brandon. Anything. Just don't end it like this. Brandon's expression didn't soften. You ended at the moment you brought him into our lives. The moment you decided I wasn't enough. Damien crossed his arms, trying to salvage some dignity. You think you're the only guy who's been cheated on? Move on, man. Brandon turned to him, his voice low and venomous. You're lucky I don't make this physical, but I'd rather destroy you where it really hurts. Damien's bravado crumbled entirely. He grabbed his jacket and headed toward the door. "You're insane," he muttered, slamming the door behind him. As the sound of Damien's car faded, Brandon looked down at Isabel, who was still on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. "Get up," he said, his voice devoid of sympathy. She slowly stood, her mascara streaked down her face. "Where am I supposed to go?" Brandon's voice was cold and final. "I don't care. You made your bed. Go lie in it. But not here. You're out tonight." Isabel tried one last desperate plea. "Brandon, please. We've been through so much. Don't throw it all away." He stared at her, a lifetime of memories flashing before his eyes. For a moment, he felt a pang of sorrow, but it was quickly overtaken by the anger and betrayal. "You threw it away. Now, get out of my sight." As Isabel stumbled toward the stairs to gather her things, Brandon sat back down at the table, picking up his glass of whiskey. He stared into the amber liquid, feeling the weight of what had just unfolded. He had loved her once, deeply. But now, as the door slammed behind her, the only thing he felt was relief. This was the end of one chapter, and the beginning of another. One where he would rebuild, stronger and wiser than before. Alone for now, but no longer shackled by the lies of someone who didn't deserve him. The moment the door slammed shut behind Damien, the house fell into an uneasy silence. Isabel collapsed onto the floor, her face buried in her hands, tears streaming freely. Her sobs were raw, echoing in the room, but Brandon didn't flinch. He stood by the dining table, his jaw clenched and his gaze distant, as if the sight of her didn't even register anymore. "Brandon, please," Isabel choked out, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake. I was stupid. I was so stupid. But I love you. I've always loved you." Brandon turned his head slowly to look at her, his expression colder than the winter wind. "You love me," he said, his tone mocking. "Is that what you call it? Inviting another man into our bed, laughing in my face, destroying the life we built together? That's love to you?" Isabel crawled toward him on her knees, clutching at the hem of his shirt. "It was a terrible mistake. I wasn't thinking straight. I was trying to fix something I thought was broken. Please, Brandon, don't throw us away over this." Brandon pulled his shirt from her grip, stepping back as though her touch was poison. "Fix something? By cheating on me? By humiliating me? You didn't just break my trust, you annihilated it. And now you want me to sweep it under the rug because you're sorry?" Isabel shook her head violently, her sobs growing louder. "No, I'll do anything, Brandon. Anything to make this right. Just tell me what you want, and I'll do it. I swear I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." Brandon scoffed, his laugh bitter and sharp. "You think this is about what I want? What I wanted was a wife I could trust. A partner. Someone who respected me, who wouldn't betray me in the worst way possible. But you didn't just betray me, Isabel. You spit on everything we had." She reached out again, grabbing his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "Please, Brandon, don't do this. I'll quit my job. I'll cut all contact with Damien. I'll go to therapy, whatever it takes. Just don't leave me. I need you." Brandon yanked his arm away, his voice rising. "Don't you dare tell me what you need. Do you think I needed this? Do you think I needed to see my wife and some other man on camera in my house? Do you think I needed to hear you call me a loser while you laugh with him? No, Isabel. You don't get to play the victim here. You made your choice." Isabel's tears blurred her vision as she looked up at him, her lips trembling. "It wasn't like that, Brandon. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I wanted to feel something again. Something exciting. I thought it would make us stronger in the end." Brandon stared at her in disbelief. "Stronger? You thought sleeping with someone else would make us stronger? God, Isabel, do you even hear yourself? You're not just selfish, you're delusional." She tried to grab his hand again, but he stepped back, his movements deliberate and firm. "Brandon, don't do this. We can fix this. I can fix this." "There's no we, Isabel," he said, his voice quieter now, but no less cutting. "Not anymore. You burned that bridge the moment you invited Damien into our lives. And as for fixing this, that's not your decision to make. It's mine, and I've made it." Isabel's sobs turned into desperate, gasping breaths. She stumbled to her feet, swaying slightly. "You're not perfect either, Brandon. You've made mistakes too. You've been so focused on your career that you barely notice me anymore. I felt invisible. Brandon raised an eyebrow, his expression unamused. So that's your excuse? I worked hard to give you this life, a beautiful home, financial security, everything you could ever want. And instead of talking to me like an adult, you decided to destroy everything behind my back? If you felt invisible, Isabel, maybe it's because you were too busy hiding in the shadows with him. Isabel's lip quivered, her face flushed with humiliation and desperation. I don't want to lose you, she whispered. Brandon's gaze softened for a fleeting moment, but it quickly hardened again. You already lost me, Isabel. The moment you made that choice, you killed any chance of us having a future. What we had is gone. Isabel staggered back, her knees buckling slightly. So, what now? You're just going to throw me out like I'm nothing? Brandon folded his arms across his chest, his stance resolute. You need to leave. Tonight. Her eyes widened in shock. Leave? Where am I supposed to go? This is my home, too. No, it's my home, Brandon said firmly. The deed is in my name, and after tonight, so is everything else. You forfeited your rights to this life the second you decided to betray me. Isabel looked around the room, her gaze desperate, as though searching for something to anchor her. You can't do this. I have nowhere to go. That's not my problem anymore, Brandon replied coldly. You should have thought about that before you decided to gamble everything we had. Isabel sank back onto the floor, her body trembling. You're punishing me. You're trying to ruin me. No, Isabel, Brandon said, his voice low but steady. You ruined yourself. I'm just making sure you face the consequences. The sound of her sobs filled the room again, but Brandon didn't flinch. He turned and walked toward the stairs, his movements slow and deliberate. Brandon, Isabel called after him, her voice hoarse. Please don't leave me like this. I love you. I'm begging you. He paused at the base of the stairs, his back to her. For a moment, he hesitated, as though weighing her words. Then he turned his head slightly, his voice emotionless. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. And with that, he climbed the stairs, leaving Isabel sobbing in the empty dining room. Months had passed since that fateful night, but the memories no longer carried the sting they once did. The dining room, which had once been the stage for betrayal, now felt warm and alive again. The soft glow of the chandelier illuminated the table, now set for two. Brandon sat across from Charlie, a bright-eyed woman with an easy laugh and a warmth that seemed to melt the cold edges of his past. So, Mr. Architect, Charlie teased, her fork pointing at him playfully, are all your dinners this extravagant? Or am I just special? Brandon chuckled, swirling his wine glass. Only for special company, he replied with a wink. Though, in my defense, I was trying to impress you. Well, mission accomplished, she said, smiling. For the first time in years, Brandon felt something he hadn't realized he'd been missing. Genuine joy. He leaned back, watching Charlie as she shared a story about her volunteer work at the local animal shelter. Her enthusiasm was contagious, her presence light yet grounding. I have to say, Charlie continued, her tone softening, you seem different from when I first met you at the gala. Lighter, happier. Whatever you've been through, it's like you've come out the other side stronger. Brandon nodded slowly, her words sinking in. I think I have. The last year was rough, to say the least. But sometimes, the hardest lessons teach you what really matters. Charlie tilted her head, curiosity dancing in her eyes. And what matters to you now? Brandon hesitated, the weight of her question pulling him inward. Trust, he finally said. Respect. Building something real with someone who values the same things. For too long, I let myself be blind to the cracks in my life, convincing myself everything was fine. But now I want something different, something honest. Charlie reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his. I think you'll find it, Brandon. You deserve to. Their eyes met, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Brandon felt at peace. Meanwhile, across town, Isabel sat alone in her cramped one-bedroom apartment. The once polished woman, who used to command attention in any room, now looked weary and worn. Stacks of unpaid bills cluttered her coffee table, and the dim light of the TV flickered against the walls. She sipped from a cheap bottle of wine, her hands trembling. Her phone buzzed on the couch beside her, and she glanced at the screen. It was another debt collector. She silenced the call, her chest tightening. The fallout from Brandon's actions had been swift and brutal. True to his word, he had sent the incriminating footage to her boss, which not only cost her her job, but also her reputation. No company in their circle would touch her now, and the financial cushion she had taken for granted was gone. As if that wasn't enough, Damien had disappeared shortly after. Whatever charm or promises he'd made to her had vanished the moment Brandon cut him off. She hadn't heard from him in months, and the silence was deafening. Isabel stared at the framed photo of her and Brandon that still hung on the wall. It was the only piece of their former life she had taken with her. Tears welled in her eyes as she traced her finger over his face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to the empty room. "I ruined everything." Back at Brandon's house, Charlie stood by the fireplace, admiring the framed sketches of his architectural projects. "These are incredible," she said, glancing over her shoulder at him. "Do you ever take a break from creating masterpieces?" Brandon laughed, walking over to join her. "Only when I'm around someone who makes me forget about work." Charlie turned to face him, her expression soft. "You're good at this, you know." Moving forward, a lot of people would have let bitterness consume them after what you went through. Brandon exhaled, his gaze dropping to the floor for a moment. "Bitterness was tempting," he admitted. "For a while I let it get to me, but then I realized something. Staying angry wouldn't fix anything. It wouldn't undo what happened or make me feel better in the long run. The best revenge wasn't destroying Isabel or Damien. It was building a better life for myself." Charlie smiled, stepping closer. "And you've done that." "Not alone," Brandon said, meeting her gaze. "I've had some help along the way." The air between them grew quiet, but it wasn't heavy. It was the kind of silence that felt full, like something unspoken was passing between them. Charlie broke the moment with a laugh. "Okay, enough of the deep stuff. Do you have dessert? Or do I need to raid your kitchen?" Brandon grinned. "Stay right there. I'll grab it." As he disappeared into the kitchen, Charlie wandered back to the dining table, her fingers brushing against the tablecloth. She couldn't help but feel that this was the beginning of something real, something she hadn't expected, but was grateful to have found. When Brandon returned with a plate of tiramisu, he found her holding the small silver photo frame he kept on the mantel. "Who's this?" she asked, showing him the photo of him and his daughter, Lily, from years ago. "That's Lily," Brandon said, his voice softening. "She's away at college now. Smart kid, too smart sometimes. She saw right through everything before I even did." Charlie placed the frame back carefully. "You must be proud of her." "I am," Brandon said with a nod. "She's one of the reasons I stayed strong through all of this. I wanted to show her that you can rebuild, no matter how broken things seem." Charlie smiled, and they settled back at the table, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. They laughed about their awkward first meeting at the gala and swapped stories about their worst dates. As the night wore on, Brandon realized something profound. He didn't feel the weight of his past anymore. The betrayal, the anger, the pain, it was still there, but it no longer controlled him. For the first time in years, he felt free. Isabel, on the other hand, spent her nights scrolling through old photos on her phone, each one a painful reminder of what she had lost. She stopped on a picture from their 15th anniversary, a candid shot of Brandon laughing, his arm around her. She remembered the way he used to look at her, like she was the only woman in the world. Now, she was just a memory in his life, a chapter he had closed. As she curled up on the couch, clutching the phone to her chest, she whispered into the emptiness, "I wish I could take it all back." But wishes wouldn't change anything. And Isabel knew, deep down, that she would spend the rest of her life haunted by the choices she had made. Brandon walked Charlie to her car at the end of the evening, the cool night air wrapping around them. "Thank you for tonight," Charlie said, her eyes warm. "No," Brandon replied with a small smile. "Thank you." As she got into her car and drove away, Brandon stood in the driveway, watching her taillights fade into the distance. For the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Turning back to the house, he walked inside and shut the door behind him. The past was behind him, and the future, for the first time, felt bright.